Hello, everyone. Good day. And to those following us online, warm greetings from the University of Jyväskylä campus here in central Finland. My name is Bon Wego. I'm a senior lecturer in International Development Studies at the University of Jyväskylä and the chair of the Finnish Society for Development Research. I am moderating this seminar entitled Reimagining Quality of Life in a Turbulent World, a Commonist Perspective on Well-Living, with a lecture to be delivered by JYU visiting fellow Dr. S A Hamed Hosseini, whose fellowship was granted by the JYU Research Council and is currently hosted by the Department of Social Sciences and Philosophy in the Faculty of Social Sciences and Humanities. Our event today is co-organized by the University of Jyväskylä's Development Studies Program and School of Resource Wisdom and the Finnish Society for Development Research. My co-host for this event is JYU Wisdom's coordinator, Helmi Jyrkkänen. Our session will be for 1.5 hours. To those on Zoom, please keep the chat going. Know that this is recorded with the hope of being uploaded to YouTube soon. We will, of course, have an open discussion later. So now let me introduce to you our guest lecturer. We are delighted to welcome Dr. S A Hamed Hosseini, a scholar whose intellectual journey over the past 3 decades has contributed meaningfully to the fields of critical development studies, global justice, and transformative social theory. Dr. Hosseini's academic path began in the early 1990s when he made a significant shift from electronics engineering to the social sciences, motivated by a deep concern with the question of what progressive alternatives might emerge in the wake of the Cold War and the rise of global neoliberalism. This long-standing commitment to exploring post-capitalist futures has shaped the distinctive trajectory of his scholarship. After completing his PhD at the Australian National University in December 2006, where he introduced the concept of accommodative consciousness and the sociology of dissident knowledge, which is an integrative constructualist approach in relation to global justice movements. Hosseini went on to develop a body of work marked by both conceptual innovation and theoretical ambition. He is the author of Alternative Globalizations, published in 2010, Consciousness Sociology, which was written in Persian, published in 2013, and Capital Redefined, published in 2024 with Barry K. Gills. In addition to leading 2 edited collections on transformative global justice, published in 2020, and the Dilemmas of Pluriversal Transitions, published in 2025, as well as numerous contributions to debates on transversality, critical open-mindedness versus authoritarian populism, pluriversal politics, value theory, the good life, and transformative global justice. At the University of Newcastle, Australia, Hamed has founded several initiatives, including the Alternative Futures Research Network, Well-Living Lab, and Common Alternatives website that reflect his commitment to collaborative inquiry and public scholarship. His current work focuses on 4 key areas. First, renewing critical development and globalization studies through transformative scholarship. Second, critically engaging with the pluriverse debate and post-development theory. Third, advancing a normative analytical approach to Marxian value theory, that is the Commonist value theory, through what he calls an axiological turn inspired by his broad notions of the commons and commoning. And fourth, reimagining quality of life through the well-living paradigm, which is a 16,000-word paper published in 2023, as well as the promotion of what he calls the commonist impulse as an antidote to what he has coined as compartmentality in his 20,000-word article published this year in the Globalizations Journal. What characterizes Hosseini's approach is a sustained effort to build bridges across traditions, empirically map and analyze networks of, and cultivate dynamic solidarities among post-capitalist initiatives, and develop what he describes as commonist frameworks for addressing the entangled socio-ecological crisis of the unholy trinity of capitality, coloniality, and modernity. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Hosseini as he shares with us his ongoing work on transformative pathways toward livable futures.
Thank you so much, Juan, for this very generous introduction that really sets up the bars too high for me. I hope I'll be able to match up with that. Yeah, I'm very thankful to both organizations, the development studies, especially FSDR, led by Bon himself, and also the School of Resource Wisdom. And thank you so much, Helmi, for helping to organize this session. I'm really honored. This is the very first time I'm actually giving a presentation on the paper outside the classrooms, and I understand the dilemma of making it as accessible as possible to those who are not familiar with the terminologies, but also trying not to make it sound too unsatisfactory to our experts that are way ahead of me in this area. Well, let's see what happens. Yeah, what I'm presenting is perhaps I can't really say that I can really present every nitty-gritty aspects of the paper. It's a 16,000-word paper published a couple of years ago, and since then, since I have started incorporating it into the teaching, I've been discovering more and more problems and flaws and shortcomings and loopholes. Well, it was not really meant to be the very last word. It was meant to be the very first step, just, entering into a quite new field for me, because I don't really come from very kind of a specialized field or very focused way of exploring quality of life. As you could hear from the introduction, my background comes from social movement studies and also development studies as well. But that has could be perhaps a little bit of a weakness in the sense that I can't really relate strongly with philosophical arguments and discussions, or maybe the scientific ones on the topic. But what I can possibly contribute is to draw on my understandings and studies of social movements, particularly global justice movement and a pluriverse of post-capitalist alternative-seeking initiatives that I have been trying to explore and map and investigate through more than maybe 2 decades. Yeah, I think it's more than 2 decades now. 25 years. So it's a very pretty long one. And the concept of well-living comes from, actually, it's inspired by the indigenous movement that was shaped maybe a few years ago, a couple of decades ago in Latin America. But it's not really limited to that. It's just a choice of of a terminology. The movement came up with the idea of the bon vivre. It's still around and inspired many other movements around the world, especially the other indigenous movements, including indigenous movements in indigenous organizations and initiatives in Australia, which means although I don't think it's indigenous, it must be a Spanish word. So living well together. So I just turned that living well together to well living for a simple reason, because the concept of well-being from my point of view, of course, has been very much widely used and watered down by many elite organizations. That's why you either when your terminology, when your language is already adopted by the elite, it's time for you to move on and come up with new words to take a bit of a distance from them. But I understand many other innovations or innovative thinking schools or schools of thought might be still using the word well-living, but trying to modify it using planetary or sustainable and whatnot, which I have no problems with that. It was just my way of trying to avoid the confusion as much as I could. So that well-living is very biocentric, it's life-centered, it's very, in that sense, quite, I'm sorry that I actually became familiar with your wisdom or your planetary well-being idea quite very lately, only as the result of my fellowship. But I can see that we're on the same page in terms of putting life at the center, organized life, planetary life at the center. So it goes beyond well-having. A lot of discussions about quality of life and well-being are, in the end of the day, are about measuring how much we have. So as I call it, well-having, to be a little bit of critical of them. And it stresses that instead of well-being, it stresses on well-becoming. So it's not just a static; it's also a process. It's not an end result, and not an static, utopian vision. Although I have no problem with seeking utopia, as far as those utopias are open to discussions and conversation, critical conversations. So, and it's also grounded in critical analysis of the ruling order. So it's not just wishful thinking, coming up with some, moral appeal or discursive shifts. And if we change our minds, then the world would change. If we change our imaginations, the world will start to change. So I think that any serious persuasion of quality of life really needs to ground itself in really serious critical analysis of what's going on, the ruling order, the status quo, those dominant modes of livelihood, dominant modes of sociability, dominant modes of governance, because they're the ones that behind many of the crises we are actually facing today. Yeah, okay. It seems to be recording. Sorry, I just alluded that. So it aims to go beyond offering a new conceptual framework for reimagining quality of life, good life as an outcome, not just as an outcome, but also covering the transitional processes through which the end results can be achieved. Now, you may ask where are your sources? Are you just sitting behind a desk and thinking about what you're calling well-living? So where does this idea come from? Well, I acknowledge that I really sit behind my desk in my academic ivory tower and limited connections with the outside world, unfortunately, especially the grassroots movements. But I've done my best, to the extent I could, in order to diversify the sources of inspiration. So number one is, as I said, critical analysis of a structural contradiction that result in current crisis, contradictions of ruling modes of livelihood and governance, unholy trinity of modernism, colonialism, and capitalism. So part of my development studies, background in development studies, but also more recently, I have become more and more engaged with criticism of capitalism as the one that is in the driver's seat. Not to belittle the importance of colonialism or what we call today coloniality, to cover also post-colonial and neo-colonial versions, and not to belittle the importance of modernism or modernity. They are, I call them the unholy trinity that go hand in hand. So it takes a very radical approach in that sense. So that's the first source. And the second source is comprehending systemic obstacles and impediments that are inherent in the current ruling orders, preventing us from. So we may be able to develop some very good understanding of what's going on and what's wrong with the system, but we also need to understand how these contradictions in the system appear to function as obstacles and roadblocks when we want to pursue something better. And so we would be able to, when we try to translate our good ideas to practice, we would know what sort of obstacles and what sort of problems and impediments we're going to face, and to avoid them and not to regenerate them. For instance, racism or racialization, gendering, intersectional discriminations. These are all part of those impediments, those part of the rooted in the contradictions, inherent contradictions of the system. I'm talking about the inherent contradictions, not the superficial contradictions. The contradictions between cutting jobs and cutting trees. You have to either cut jobs or cut it. What are very, very, very much embedded into the DNA of what we call capital or capitalism. So this, from the critical examinations of the status quo, we'll learn what to avoid rather than reverse engineering the crisis into something that we think it's a good one, making more and avoiding just simply making moral appeals or merely pursuing discursive shifts, as I said before. So the third source of inspiration or insight would be mapping and critically reflecting on fallacies and failures of predominant good life discourses. There's been a lot of discourses, political and non-political and philosophical, maybe grassroots level, top-down sort of discourses that have actually shaped throughout the history, shaped the societies we live in, and also they have been shaped by those modes of livelihood, those modes of governance. So there's a dialectical relationship between discourse or ideology on the one hand, what Marx calls perhaps, or Marxists call the superstructure and the infrastructure, not just a one-way relationship. So this paper actually covers the third source mostly, and then you need to find some other works that I have shared. Maybe we can share a link to them underneath the recorded video on YouTube. That is the work that we started with me and my team. Of course, those things that you were saying in your introduction were not just me. There's a collective work behind it. So the mapping and engaging with the progressive movements that actively challenge and transform the dominant order in pursuit of better ways of living. So if we're really serious about, presenting something new, we need to really have connections with those who are on the ground, at the grassroots level, pursuing things that are practical. And you could be a scholar at the same time, but you can also be an activist and involved. Maybe you can't really involve in all of them or many of them or most of them, but at least you can involve in some of them. I have been fortunate to be connected to an organization in Australia called New Economy Network Australia, NENA, N-E-N-A. Which is a network building network or organizations. And they worked like, they call them, they consider possibly themselves as honeybees, cross pollinations between different alternatives. So they run biannual conferences. They bring one is coming actually in the end of this year, I think possibly November. They bring many alternative seeking initiatives and organizations from the civil society level, from the grassroots level, to talk to each other. And they provided us with a very good source of information, a very large directory of more than 500 organizations, which actually surprised me when I looked at I couldn't believe that we had that many organizations directly involved in pursuing post-capitalist shifts. Unfortunately, the research happened in 2021, the second wave of COVID too, and we ended up having 96 completing the survey and also we interviewed 14 of them. So it was a limited amount of information, but diverse and rich enough to give us some ideas. And the subject was that how would this organization conceptualize good life? And you know, the dimensions and aspects, and so that was also another source. So you don't see much of that, unfortunately, here, but this paper draws on what I should say in a very kind of a primitive level, because it's at the beginning very embryonic. So this therefore this approach, development approach, is not just a scholarly approach. I would call it not something that I invented. I think you were familiar with that concept since, I think it's been around since 1950s. As collectivism, that means overcoming the divide between theory and practice. And then the fifth source of information is the particular contribution that I'm making, that draws on the book that we have recently published called Capital Redefined, the Communist Value Theory to Liberate Life. It dates back to a few years earlier of me trying to bring Marxian approach, especially Marxian value theory, into the conversation in my own way, by differentiating between true value and fetish value, which is quite a different story. But yeah, it considers, you know, it's a belief that life itself is a commons of utmost true value. I think everybody here is familiar with the concept commons. Normally at the superficial level, it refers to the shared resources that are commonly owned, collectively owned, but it has actually the concept or the notion has become recently very broadened to, for instance, now we talk about knowledge commons or digital commons, things that are actually created by people contribute, members. Could be humans and non-humans. You look at any ecosystem, fisheries, I don't know, forest, any ecosystem, it works like a commons. It's not owned by privately owned by anyone. Everybody contributes to that, and everybody benefits to the extent that they would not transgress the capacities of the ecosystem to regenerate itself. So that you can see that's a very, very highly broad and maybe a little bit problematic in that sense, but highly broad and perception. And then it applies this concept of commons to many things. So it wants us to see the estate as a commons. You know, imagine the estate is as a commons. Imagine the market is treated as a commons. And even life is seen as a commons, organized life, planetary life. So in this commons, what happens is these are the utmost true value, and this is a new concept we're trying to add to the lexicon, that the true value of every activity is evaluated based on its positive impact on the sustainable regeneration of organized planetary life, encompassing all living beings, human and non-human. So this is the place that true value is being produced, redistributed, and consumed in order to make the regeneration of that system possible. Although I hesitate to constantly use the word system. The word system that when I use a little bit, again, looser, in a looser meaning. I think we can also think of things in a network way, but at the end of the day, if you ask me, I'm for net systems, you know, looking at the systems as networks. And networks as systems, you know, connected systems. So to avoid those kind of functionalist, hierarchical, closed, enclosed entities, kind of thing. That normally it's one of the criticisms of general system theories we would like to avoid while still using the word system. Now, okay, so the paper, I'm not sure how much of the paper I can present. Maybe I have to speed up, and because the paper is already available, there's no point for me to go through the nitty-gritties of it. It starts with a kind of a reflection on recent developments in the rise of new discourses and movements recently that argue that the GDP is not really enough. Although that is not really very recent, And then it has translated itself into very interesting initiatives. A lot of them mostly obsessed with measuring, but it's still very. I think it's something that we should welcome. The UK is measuring national well-being program, both hands cross national happiness. Australia's National Development, OECD Better Life Index, World Happiness Index, Human Development Index, United Nations SDGs, etc., etc. That are normally turned into matrix and things like that. And then so as you can see, this as I said, it's not new, but interestingly, as a result of the GFC and then later on COVID pandemic, COVID-19, it gained greater momentum in recent years, and people try to many initiatives across the world try to come up with new ways of evaluating either quantitatively or qualitatively even quality about that is not reduced to only economic growth or GDP, etc., etc. So among the very well-known ones that I have come across, and I guess possibly you too, well-being economy, but also the degrowth movements that they challenge the idea of constant growth, and they also question the idea of delinking growth from, and they say it's not possible to delink growth from sustainability. You can't have both, you can't have the cake and eat it. So ecological damage and social inequalities are the products of the constant, pursuing constant growth. So they come up with, they question the idea of prosperity or come up with the new understanding of prosperity that is more quality oriented than quantity oriented. But then it raises the question of if we because many of these movements want us to change our view and perspective and apply it and operationalize it, and the perception is that or the expectation is that when you change your mind, when you change your discourse, especially at the institutional level and enforces from top down, maybe then you can actually influence change and get somewhere. So these questions that so if that's the case, well, why we're not witnessing dramatic shifts yet after decades? And as I said before, this is not really new. You can trace it back to what Robert Kennedy, brother of JFK, said about GNP. Those days they were calling it gross national product, that measures everything but what should really except what make lives worthwhile. Or worth living, something like that. I'm just rephrasing. Or President Johnson, ironically the same guy who initiated or started Vietnam War, and his quote that he talks about good society, where it's a society where the men are less obsessed with are more obsessed with or more concerned about the quality of their goals than the quantity of their goods, which sounds very progressive. But these progressive ideas from center left have been around, and then the question is that why we're not getting there yet. And then do we need to actually identify structural causes and system? It's kind of as one of these impediments is just these discourses that come from the reformist top down, and they want to change, but they don't want to challenge. And I think that's the reason. But everything is not really determined at the discursive level. These discourses really represent the underpinning modes of producing value and distributing value, and above all, defining what value should be. That is even more important, just the production and distribution. What really mean by value? What should be really value? That's the normative aspect that also is missing. So a lot of these discourses, they come, I know as soon as you open the book or open the paper, and I should actually criticize myself for following the same path. They just start with, how bad and ugly the crises are, and then use that, how bad and ugly crises are, to justify their agenda, their own agenda. We all know how bad the situations are, but how can you really say that this would translate to what the agenda that actually you want to pursue? So unfortunately I realize that I have myself followed as well in some of my works. So the key questions in the paper are that, what are the built-in limitations of the reformist well-being approach? So we need to really look into this because they give us some indications of what's going on. The system realizes, or part of the system realizes something is wrong and something is not really rational, and they want to rationalize capitalism, so the capitalism would actually practically behind many of these sustainability discourses, and I'm sure you were very well aware, is the sustainability of the system. If they're worried about the ecological sustainability, is because they're worried that this lack of ecological sustainability would hurt the economic sustainability. So it's the value of ecology. The reason that we want to promote ecological health seems to be very much tied to our still growth-oriented perspectives. So that is a contradiction in itself, and an impediment. So number two question is that how the insights from transformative movement, post-capitalist, post-coloniality, there's a very broad range of them that we recently call them the pluribus, not the universe, because they're very plural, the pluribus of all these alternatives, help us shape a new paradigm. And number three is it's a practicality questions and how far a communist perspective can guide our institutional policy change. As I said before, and the paper later on unfolds this concept that what is communist perspective. As I said before, again, it's centering our understanding of good life on the commons, an idea that comes from commons, the actions that are associated with commons, that we call them commoning, the way that we organize commons or govern commons naturally, especially I'm talking about ecological one, not the artificial ones. And then how would that result in institutions? So the paper, the last section of the paper ends up proposing, again, not just something like dictating or anything. I'm nowhere into I'm no one and nowhere into in the sense that I will be able to do that. But it just proposes a number of institutional changes that are aligned with the principles of the well-living paradigm that are outlined earlier in the paper, and then what would be the implication or consequences of those implications of those principles for institutional and policy changes. Although I would say, again, I would hesitate to talk too much about policy changes. As soon as you talk about policy changes, you're thinking about within the existing time frame. So this paradigmic shift requires us to translate it more towards into political actions, because the political actions are a little bit deeper than just policy changes. Not that we are not inclusive of policy changes, but I mean, as if policy changes are serious enough, I'm fine with them. But if they're not, I think we need to even go for constitutional changes and political movements that would finally translate themselves into policy changes. Radical policy changes. So the method that I have used, I call it reflexive meta-theoretical analysis, that again, critically looking at lots of different ways people have thought about good life across various fields, but not just to summarize them, but rather to analyze their underlying assumptions and finding the connections between, social equality, social justice and injustices, and ecological balances and imbalances, plus drawing inspirations from a specific movements from global south, both global south and global north. So, getting energy and core concepts from one critical look at the limitations of the reformist perspective. As I said before, integrating insights from transformative. I think I'm repeating myself here, right? So it's about synthesizing perspectives, that we study. And that provides us with a kind of a platform that can be fed back to those grassroots organizations that we have studied, in order to provide them with a framework to converse with each other. They don't really make headlines. That doesn't mean they don't exist. They don't really make headlines, and that makes them really very much unaware of each other. So at the survey that we did, we realized that a lot of these organizations share much more than they can imagine with each other. And we did a bit of a network. I did a bit of a network analysis, and then that paper tries to actually portray some of those commonalities. So it sounds still theoretical, but yes, but it aims for original contribution. Yes, this section of the paper goes through a history of good life. I found similar arguments made in your very interesting book, The Interdisciplinary Perspectives in Planetary Life. Very, very interesting. I think we're on the same page. This actually gives a little bit of a chronological overview of the ideas about good life throughout the history. I mean, we humans have always been concerned about what good life is, improving our livelihoods and living conditions. But the more societies, especially from the beginning of when we stop becoming hunter-gatherers, I'm simplifying history, of course, and then adopted more sophisticated modes of production like agriculture. And also the more the history progresses and the modes of production progress, the more these ideas of good life tangle with power, resources, control, and therefore good life becomes a contested field, a contested territory, a site of a struggle between those with power and those without power, and not just abstract ideas, but at the end of the day, who gets what. Yeah, I mean, a lot of works on this issue perhaps start from or refer to the ancient philosophical divide between hedonism and eudaimonism. The hedonism, like the Epicureans, maximizing pleasure, minimizing pain, versus Aristotelian, where solution, and it's about fulfilling potentials, living meaningfully with hardships. So you don't need to. Sometimes you have to go through lots of pain in order to flourish, right? To materialize or realize your potentials. But this debate on the surface may sound like a little bit too philosophical, or practically, and two opposite poles of a philosophical spectrum. But practically, when you look at the history, the two have been come together. For instance, pre-capitalist societies, the eudaimonia for the masses. The masses have to go through the hardship, and that's good for them, pursuing the virtue and duty and know your place. But when it comes to those sultans and kings and the elite, it's all hedonism for them. So we see that they can come together in kind of one single system. Then religious and community rules have played role in defining flourishing as following the established path, following the religious commandments, etc., etc. And then finally, it finds a very dark side in when colonialism starts to weaponize the idea of good society in the name of civilized versus uncivilized, in order to subjugate the subaltern societies and justify colonization. And then later on, we've got the big shift. Enlightenment happens in Europe when secular versions of philosophies and ideas surface around the idea of good life, what good life is, the social contracts from Hobbes and Rousseau, how do we agree to live together, natural rights and property rights, Locke and Paine, inherent rights of individuals, that became the bedrock for the US Declaration of Independence and UN Declaration of Human Rights. And then the criticisms of this, that has, I think we share that very much closely, that they're very human-centered and individualistic reductionists, that, they struggle with big global crisis, not addressing underlying structural issues, and they neglect economic injustices, and then can result in kind of a liberal neutrality. You have to define good life at the communal level because there is no such thing as society, as Thatcher said, or there's no such thing as community, or it's all individuals. That would hide lots of injustices and inequalities. Then you've got the rise of liberal psychology, focusing on individual responsibility. Then you've got the utilitarianism, that greater good for greater number, well-being as the ultimate moral goal, although measuring it is very tricky. And how about the minority? And then you've got, of course, the fascist version of it, very exclusionist and racist. You know, they even ended up, I think, measuring the women's milk as one of the signs of the superiority of the race, or how masculine men are. We ended up, or we thought we ended it up after World War II, and then it was replaced with, you know, the idea of development and developmentalism, very Western-centric, again, Eurocentric, as I'm sure you're very familiar with that. And then it was then led to the post-80s neoliberalism, the decline of welfare state. The developmentalism was replaced with globalism, and then well-being co-opted by caring corporate capitalism. Market knows best. Let the market work. It's individuals' responsibility to improve themselves in their status in the market, so that will be sellable. You know, happiness would follow. Passive acceptance of market outcomes, and then we finally reached 2008 global financial crisis that was supposed to actually delegitimize, but unfortunately we ended up pursuing austerity measures, and those austerity measures were again kind of justified on the basis of Aristotelian eudaimonic, that you go through these austerities and hardship, financial hardships to find your higher purposes. And then I have also noticed that I guess there are some, I see some studies that some kind of stoicism has become quite popular among young people, which is understandable, because when you don't have the welfare state to go, and it's all market and it's all you as an individual, you come up with, this kind of ideologies or philosophies of good life can be very much popular, especially you're very much glued to your cell phone, and then so the happiness is reality minus expectation. Manage your expectations. Understand that you can't really change everything, so don't bother yourself with changing things that you can't really change, and only focus on the things that you can change. And of course, since the system is too big to change, then then you become depoliticized. But it's not like, these top-down things. People have been constantly pushing back at the grassroots level with their own new ideas that I would refer to them later on. It's not been all dark. Then the paper raises this question that should good life only be about humans? How about interconnectedness with nature, plus focusing on community? Shared purposes, where we can locate the shared purposes and solidarity, what we can do, for instance, when the individual clashes with the collective, and the rest of other contradictions. And also argues the paper for the new movements, these grassroots movements that also push for the inclusion of indigenous ontologies and indigenous perspectives. This indigenous modes of livelihood is not just perspectives, but also modes of living and being that are practiced, that have been practiced by indigenous people for many, many thousands of years. That they're really not dualistic, and they don't really differentiate between humans and non-humans. They've got a very kind of a holistic or interconnected perspective or ontology about what world is. And so these are very interesting. I mean, I see that in sociology we talk about post-humanism as a new school of thought. Well, the most post-humanists have been the indigenous for many, many thousands of years. We can't really get that much credit, but it's typical of us in the global north to do that. But anyway, so this is again learning from the indigenous that they actually decompartmentalize. Our modern society is about compartmentalization. It's not not just the dualism of between society and nature, men and women, etc., etc. Dualism is part of it. Critical social theory has paid a significant amount of attention dismantling those questioning those dualisms, but actually, what is broader is compartmentality. It's again a subject of another paper. I don't get into the details of that, but it's about overcoming artificial divisions between ecology, politics, economy, society, as if they are different aspects and they're not interrelated. Whereas in reality, they are interrelated. The reason they appear to be separated is because of capitalism, coloniality, and modernism. That differentiates them, creates an artificial, mechanical relationship instead of replacing the organic relationship between the ecology, what we call ecology, what we call the social, what we call the political, what we call the cultural. So it's about seeing the whole web of life, or what we call life domain, as a commons. Life is a commons of highest value, as I said before. So the well-living paradigm as an alternative. So the second part of the paper sets up this stage for finally presenting the idea of the well-living paradigm. So indeed, the principles of interconnectedness and harmony span various ontological understandings are observed in ecological commons. Life itself can be perceived as a commons. Embracing good life within this framework involves engaging a functional way of commoning, where individuals and communities actively participate in the co-creation and sustenance of well-being of all beings. So very, very mathful and perhaps giving you a little bit of a dizziness, but I hope that would encourage you to explore it a little bit by reading the paper. Okay. So yes, as I said before, it draws out, and so it's just the beginning. I can't say it's in the last final stage, but it draws on, and this is just a few names that I remember that I put to the paper. So it draws from a wide range of groups or initiatives of movements, post-growth movements, indigenous groups, liberation theologies, convivialists, green localists, agroecologists, post-developmentalist, circular economy advocates, solidarity economy, commons movements, advocating democratic control, and it's just this is diverse. So of course they're very different, but we can actually find common threads quite easily. A very popular among them is advocating for democratic control, collective ownership, or even a stewardship as a more kind of advanced idea. It's not about owning. Look at the indigenous people; don't see themselves owning the land. If they do, it's because we have actually been stealing their land, and now they want to declare it. That's why they use the word ownership. But practically and originally, their relationship with the land is actually based on stewardship. They see themselves belonging to the land as well, and then it translates itself not to ownership, but not even collective ownership. For some of us, collective ownership might sound a little bit progressive compared to private ownership, but collective stewardship is even more progressive because it's about mutual responsibilities. Okay, so powerful critique and visions, but okay, yeah. The interesting thing is that when you draw on this and they provide you with a very rich source of ideas, good ideas that you can incorporate into your platform, the well-being as the platform. I'm talking about building as a platform, not as a blueprint. As a platform, it just gives us it sets the table, puts some foods, and invites people to bring their own foods as well, and then have conversations and liaise with each other over what we want. So the principles should be broad enough in order to avoid blueprinting. We need to keep the principles broad enough so they can be, as I say, contextually characterized. So there was those groups that come across our principles would be able to see how they can relate it to their lives, how they can operationalize and translate it into practices. how would they interpret it? So they should be broad enough to be interpreted, but it should be narrow enough in order to give some kind of identity to our paradigm. So the paradigm would not become something that would submit itself to absolute relativism or too loose to be pursued. That's why it's important so it is just offers new ideas that are inspired by this movement. But these movements normally pursue what they think should be pursued. That's why, in that sense, they are very highly normative and much less analytical. So if you look into each one of them, they don't currently come up with the analysis of what's wrong with the system at the structural level, at the essential level, at the substantial level. So it is important to actually complement them with other types of movements that can actually provide us with quite rich analytical approaches, like Marxist theories on exploitation and surplus value, ecocentric approaches like eco-socialism, eco-anarchism, ecofeminism, anti-colonial perspectives, intersectional political economics, which are very much feminist, analyzing unpaid work and intersectional inequalities. The list goes on. But you see, these kind of movements, although they have equivalents at the grassroots levels that pursue their own agendas and their own ideals, but they also provide us with kind of very interesting analysis of the contradictions of the system, inherent inbuilt contradictions. So, and also I've been drawing on years of teaching and researching post-capitalist pluriverse. I run a website called the Common Alternatives, and you can see. I don't know if we can share this slides maybe as somewhere. Maybe I can possibly provide you with a link that you can put under the. That would be nice, so people would be able to look into this slide. I don't think I can cover all of them, but anyway, so it's about combining anti-system. It's important to square and integrate anti-systemic critics with the utopian normative visions. Of course, there are so many dilemmas, there are so many challenges in integrating these two sides, but it is a path worth pursuing. I don't think any other alternative path to this, if we are really serious about making changes, that would bring people at the grassroots levels on board, but also at the scholarship level as well. When we analyze things, I think we need to complement each other. Yes. And this is the paper, Well-Living Paradigm. This is the book that actually tries to develop a new theory of capital or capitalism by focusing on the concept or idea of value and redefining value. And this is the one that you mentioned, published 2025. It's a 20,000 word, which actually looks into many alternative seeking initiatives, and it actually it's kind of a diagnostic that shows actually a lot of movements that are pursuing very progressive ideas. They themselves suffer from the problem of what I call compartmentality, that they see themselves kind of very specialized in one singular path of making change and not really drawing on other movements, not talking to many other movements. Of course, no one and we don't expect that everyone would be specialized in everything, but we would expect that they would actually be able to learn from each other and see how other movements can complement what they can't deliver. For instance, many degrowth movements possibly need to, and this has already started, listen to the Marxian analysis and become a little bit more socialistic in order, because they know that a lot of these great ideas like degrowth or for instance universal basic income, they would be functional, but only when we're in a socialistic feministic context, anti-colonial context, rather than in capitalism. If they are exercised under capitalism, even Milton Friedman would love universal basic income, as he did, and he accepted that. So yeah, and there are a couple of videos, and then the second part, or that it gets into the concept. The communist. I start with the communist state of being. Life itself, as I said, is seen as commons. That is the very core idea. Evaluating actions and system based on whether they positively impact the sustainable regeneration of organized planetary life or not. That would cover both humans and non-humans. So moving from does this grow the economy? Does this individual human make individuals human happier? To does this help life to flourish sustainably? So this is very progressive, and I really that's really the core part of the idea. But I understand that if it is not really strongly linked and it comes up as a blueprint that is developed by us in academia, being offered to the rest of the society, especially the institutions that might be interested to implement them top down. That can even be an idea that can be pursued by what some people call ecological fascism. If it is not really paying attention to the way that the institutions need to be reformed, or at the grassroots levels, the practices that need to be pursued. And that's why when it's being translated with the well-being paradigm, it needs to be prefigurative. By that we mean the means should really match the ends. If you want to, for instance, achieve solidarity, you can't go through hierarchical institutions and organizations. If you want to pursue sustainability, you really need to start ecological care from the beginning, from your or your group, your institution, wherever you live, wherever you work. So that is what we call it prefigurative, in order to make it not just a rigid blueprint. So it fosters diversity in different ways of living, but all within the recognition of the interconnectedness of life, the intrinsic value of Earth and its being. So this is the non-negotiable aspect of it, I'm afraid. It may sound a little bit too rigid in the sense that I say it's non-negotiable, but it's up there. If people really think life is worth protecting, I think most of us would do. Then this is the framework, and within this framework, we can see how life really organizes and regenerates itself. You can come up with some different frameworks in order to understand it, scientific, philosophical. I have adopted the Aristotelian four causes as a framework to make sense of how life remakes itself and regenerates itself. But you could come up with other different types. But yeah, so this is a flexibility within a strong ethical framework. That is what being I think it's worth considering. So when it's exercised at the societal level, so it goes beyond summing of our personal preferences, grounded in the comprehensive understanding of good life, plus comprehensions of root causes of our crisis, plus collective action that needs to be non-reformist reform, or, as I said before, prefigurative. So actively challenging the forces that cause disharmony, like patriarchal racial capitalism, plutocracy, systems of prioritized power and profit over systems that privatize power and profit over people and planet. Process of collective action for non-reformist reform, building broad alliances, community building, non-violent direct actions, civil disobedience. And this is what I call what I was talking about, contextual characterization, in order to avoid making the paradigm as a blueprint. So it's that needs to be adopted and put on the table and discussed and by different communities. So in order to relate it to unique cultural settings and a specific ecological system, so relativity, or I would say diversity, of what defines meaningfulness of life, but not uncritically accepting norms. Where a lot of people, really admire community and think that everything should be moved towards local community and localizations, which I'm for it. I mean, but I don't see it adequate. first thing first, the concept of community can be as large as the global. We can think of global community. We all live on a single planet, but we also need to understand this global community is very much divided between a very diverse range or broad range of many local communities as well. It needs to be so therefore and that's one reason. The other reason is that what we call normally community, I may phrase it, it could have include lots of nasty things like traditional patriarchal discriminations from the past, from the pre-modern era that can regenerate themselves in the name of alternatives to capitalism, theocracy, etc., etc. So this needs to be dialogical, and it needs to give opportunities to oppressed and marginalized groups within those communities in order to participate in dialogues that are not coercive or coercion free. I'm not getting a little bit close to the Habermasian approach, I believe. The four principles of how much time I have? 2 minutes?
We only have 25 minutes in the whole session.
In the whole session. Oh, left.
We have 25 minutes left.
Oh, okay, so I'll just go through this quickly and invite you to read them carefully. So this is based on four principles that I said. If we look at life or planetary life or any ecosystem or subsystem in the planetary life as a commons, we can actually come up with the four essence, and using Aristotelian four causes, we can come up with four foundations. The livability, which corresponds to the Aristotelian material cause. Think of this building. Okay, the four causes that are behind this building that make this building, come to existence. What are they? Well, you may think of the materials used. You may also think of, you can't really pile up those materials and call it a building. So you need also a plan. So that is the formal cause, so the material cause, the formal cause, but also you need some people to put together those materials based on the plan. So these are the efficient cause, and the final cause is, of course, the purpose of that building that give us protection, or it can actually provide us a space to come together to listen to a very boring presentation. So that is the final cause. So this material cause, efficient cause, formal cause, and the final cause. And this really, when we apply it to life as a commons, you come up with this livability, as is harmony. This is the material cause, harmony with the entire life domain, recognizing deep interconnectedness and interdependence, etc., etc. I skip these, and then the second one is creativity, that corresponds to the efficient cause. Okay, and then conviviality, that corresponds to the formal cause, and alterity, that corresponds to the final cause. If I have time, maybe I would just play this part. Is that okay? That make us maybe less sleepy, maybe a little bit. This is, I'm not really professional. I made this documentary in order to represent these four causes of the four common causes of the value.
In today's world, value appears in many familiar forms, as commodities, labor, money, or capital. But what does value truly mean? In a capitalist system, value is extracted from its roots, its connections to life and community, becoming something abstract and detached. It turns the concrete realities of social relationships and ecological interactions into numbers, profits, and trade. It becomes something that can be counted but not felt. This is the process of fetishization, where value seems to have a life of its own, while its origins in human labor and natural processes fade from view. In Capital Redefined, authors Hosseini and Gills introduce a new way of thinking about value, something they call Commonist value theory. This theory doesn't just count value in terms of exchange or surplus. It redefines it as something holistic, something that is deeply tied to communal, ecological, and political relationships. True value, they argue, is not just about profits or growth, but about nurturing life, both human and more than human.
To understand this idea better, we can turn to Aristotle, whose doctrine of four causes helps develop a multi-dimensional perception of the sources of value. In this framework, true value is seen as the result of four key sources: more than human creativity, livability, conviviality, and alterity, each corresponding to one of Aristotle's causes known as the efficient, the material, the formal, and the final causes, respectively. First, consider more than human creativity, which aligns with Aristotle's efficient cause. It refers to the regenerative forces inherent in nature, how ecosystems collaborate with human efforts to sustain life. This isn't just about human ingenuity, but the co-creative potential of soil, plants, and pollinators that keep life flourishing. It's a value that resists being reduced to mere inputs for industrial production. Then there's livability, the material cause of true value. It's about the conditions that allow all forms of life to thrive. It's not simply an economic measure. It's the very foundation of resilience and ecological balance. Whether it's clean water, fertile soil, or vibrant communities, livability is rooted in the quality of life for both humans and the ecosystems around them. Next, conviviality, Aristotle's formal cause, is about the quality of relationships. It's the interdependence and solidarity within and between human and non-human communities. It fosters cooperation and non-exploitative interactions, promoting mutual support and collective well-being. Lastly, alterity is the transformative force linked to Aristotle's final cause. It is about envisioning and enacting alternative ways of living that challenge the structures of capitalism. Alterity inspires us to move beyond critique, actively creating pathways toward a commonist state of living where human and non-human flourishing is the ultimate goal.
Commonist value theory offers a bold new vision, one that not only critiques how value is distorted under capitalism, but also shows a way forward. It aims to reclaim value from the grips of capitalist abstraction by fostering systems of recommonization. This involves building new social relationships and economic practices grounded in communal stewardship, ecological reciprocity, and collective well-living. It's a theory that invites us to reimagine what value truly means, how it can sustain rather than extract, and how it can pave the way for a more just and regenerative world.
Okay, well, thank you for your patience. And then when you translate this to your definition of well-being, come up with these four dimensions: the objective, subjective. I think a lot of conversations around quality of life consider that two, objective and subjective, but it also as intersubjective, that is again about relational and social psychological dimensions, and transsubjective, that is between humans and the institutions and the environment. So, and then I don't go through them. I think I need to give some time for conversation. Why I don't know, skipping them, how helpful that would be. But then again, it is multidimensional, considers quality of life as multidimensional, comes up with 7 interrelated levels, from very micro level of personal household level to micro communal, meso communal, macro communal, national, societal, international, but not just geographical scopes and scales or levels, but also non-geographical, non-material ones, like ethnic, religious, ethno-religious, or cultural and ideological communities that may cut across the geographical boundaries, etc., etc. And then if we live up to those principles, the paper argues that we may come up with these 9 at those levels and dimensions. We may come up with 9 interdependent qualities of well-living that would help us to see, are we on the path towards what we consider as well-living. Now, again, these are very, very broadly defined. subject to for each community to actually operationalize it and interpret it. But you see, there's a very different. They can be even turned into, for surface level, measurement. They can turn into matrix maybe, or qualitative ways of evaluating the current situation in our society or in other societies. But you see, these are not about well-having. This is not about how much access we have to the public sector or the health system functioning or not. These are the precursors to those. So if we actually look at these, you see, and try to see if they do exist in a society or not, we can say, okay, well, this society is on the path. Or if they have achieved something already that is acceptable, that achievement is sustainable. If they have achieved some level of, for instance, prosperity, either quantitative or qualitative, that is not based on the exploitation and colonization of other societies. That is not based on being complicit to genocides that happen in other places. So it is very much, I would say, as a precondition or precursor to what we normally consider as the criteria that we translate into matrix to measure how good we are. So harmonious coexistence concept. I don't go through them, unfortunately, as we don't have time, but I really invite you to look at these qualities. And again, they are subject to conversation. I'm not saying that these are the final words. Far from that, just the first words for better conversation. And then finally, the paper ends up with suggesting or recommending. Again, they are not me, coming up with these ideas about institutional changes. These are the institutional changes that are required in order for the well-being paradigm to be implemented or to get somewhere or to be realized. So the economic institutions should be organized around solidarity, cooperation, care, justice, and not just profit. It's the idea of a principle of non-exploitation from each according to their capacity to each according to their basic needs, plus their contribution to the overall well-being of their community. So commons-based governance, solidarity economy, worker. You see, these names might look familiar to you because they do really exist. So they're not just in the imaginations. These are movements that are already pushing. But as I said before, the fact that they're not making headlines, that doesn't mean they don't exist. And there's a growing number of books, even dictionaries, encyclopedias, and websites, like, for instance, the Next System Project website that I really admire. And yes, so I've got here. I'm getting the signals that I should shut up. And then the educational, political institutions, etc., and then the legislative frameworks that need to be reformed and transformed, etc. Yeah. Okay. Apologies for making this too lengthy and too boring. But I hope that this, even if we run out of time for having decent conversations across our perspectives, we would find more opportunities later on. Well, let's see. Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Maybe you need to take some notes for the questions.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Hamed, for a comprehensive, insightful, and thought-provoking presentation about the well-living paradigm. We only have roughly 12 minutes left, so that's why I would have wanted to open the discussion, because we have good attendance even online. There are about 20 people online. So I think for now, just to be efficient with time, I would like to collect comments and questions from the audience. Any comments? Or yes, Karambe, who else would like to say something? Okay, how about online? Who else? Yes, engaged. Who else? Okay, Karambe.
Yeah, thank you so much. My name is Karende. I'm Two questions. One is
Sorry, what was your name?
Hamed. One is the concentration of so many concepts, most of which I think are highly contested. So I don't know how you weave your head through this because then these concepts. Then two is when you present, as you presented the well-being theory or perspective, whatever you want to call it, I kind of see that it has quite a lot to do with sustainability. There is quite a lot of, I am not a scholar of sustainability, but the issue that I have engaged with it is that there is quite a lot of similarities. And someone could even think that maybe this is sustainability in another skill. What is your, I mean, as you develop this theory and so on, you and you think of it that way, you deliberate the way sustainability. Yeah, those are
Good, thank you.
And then, hello, my name is Jan.
Your name?
Higa. I'm also an experimental researcher here. So my question concerns the perceptions on corruption. Like, what do you think perceptions on corruption, like somehow partly at least like shape the overall like thoughts on well-being? Because like I might be wrong, but I imagine that in countries and communities that have low corruption, so their thoughts on well-being might be completely different from the ones that have like rampant and systemic corruption, because it's also like a psychological factor. I might like struggle financially sometimes, but as long as I know that the system is not steal from me, I have completely different opinions on well-being. So what would you comment on that?
Any other comments? Okay. Yes, Thea. It's Thea Cortez. Yes,
Yes,
Thea.
thank you. Thank you for the thematically very rich talk. Could you clarify a bit about the idea of life as commons, and especially whether it can be a really biocentric idea, or is the idea of commons necessarily anthropocentric, and how do you then link it to the non-anthropocentric ideas that you also had as very central in your approach? Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Thea. But maybe I'll just add, could you please expound on your comment on perhaps your criticism of the concept well-being? Because you also noted in there that it is like a neoliberal concept whereby well-being is the goal. And, our faculty also has set up well-being as a strategy and a goal. Our university has been framed also within the concept of well-being. So, yeah. And I think, yes, Hamed, you have...
There is one
more.
Yeah.
In the chat from Emma, I think he's a postdoc or PhD here. Thank you for the insightful lecture. Just a question. Considering all of humanity's historical experiences across the world, isn't it very dangerous to advocate for a utopian normative vision, if I understand it correctly? Okay, that's all for this part.
Yeah, thank you.
Maybe you can.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, these questions are really, I would say, are very foundational, very big, and I'm not sure if I can really give you very satisfactory answers, but provide me with more foods for thinking. Karen, yeah. Two questions, contradictions. So concentrations of so many concepts, and these concepts are highly contested. So is this a comment you want me to? So you
Just
think?
an observation one.
Yeah, I acknowledge that. Yeah, this paper provides us with lots of concepts, and they could be highly contested, as you said. But when we come up with, I guess when we want to, I mean, address an issue as big as this and as sophisticated as this, I don't see any other way but to come up with a constellation of concepts. Some of them having significant overlaps with already existing concepts, and some of them trying to inject in kind of a new vision, or they're dislocated and decontextualized, and they may not mean the same way as these concepts have already been meant. For instance, the concept of well-being or quality of life. So yeah, I acknowledge that, and this is normally a kind of a weakness, maybe from practical point of view. But the more they are discussed and the more they are taken into conversations at the practical level, perhaps the more we will have the more we will be able to concretize them. But that's a kind of a legitimate concern and comment. So you say that a lot of this has to do with sustainability. It's very similar to, or shows similarities with sustainability. I acknowledge that, but sustainability is not just one coherent paradigm or a school of thought. There are so many ways of thinking about sustainability. Some of them top down, some of them bottom up, some of them very reformist, some of them a little bit more radical. But I'm not, as I said, I'm not against that, against the idea of sustainability. But I normally use sustainability as catchphrase, but I prefer regenerativity in order to again take a bit of a distance from the discourses of sustainability that have become very dominant. But also I understand there are many organizations and initiatives that keep using sustainability, but they inject their own more radical or more different or alternative understanding of sustainability when they discuss it. I mean, this is kind of natural to human knowledge, unfortunately or fortunately. We're very complex, and concepts that we use, even human rights, that may sound like very positive, that can be used in order to bomb other countries. So it is, this is concepts, right? So Kiga, yes, you talked about sorry, what was that? Corruption, yes, corruption. Yes, and the fact that societies that suffer from corruption may not be quite open to this idea. Is that what you were saying, or
No, like their overall thoughts and perceptions on well-being might be different.
Yes.
And also these thoughts might be also shaped by the factor that the system itself is not corrupt.
Is shaped by the fact that the system should not be corrupt.
The communities or the countries that do not have systemic corruption, or the overall.
Okay, they might have a different perception of good life. Yeah, definitely. As I said, this is related to the contextual characterization of these principles. You take these principles to different societies, and then they're open to reinterpretations about those societies according to their social settings, political settings. This they suffer from. I mean, today morning when I was coming to here, I was thinking myself, okay, I'm going somewhere to talk about good life, and at the same time, the country I originally come from, Iran, is now it's being, it's going through a terrible time, and I was thinking, what sort of good life I'm really talking about. This is for those people not having the bombs, dropping on their heads is the good life, maybe at this stage. But this is again, as I said, it instead of giving us a static picture or image of the status quo, it it tries to talk about the prerequisites of achieving something according to those communities would be considered as good life. But there is a principle, and that principle is that whatever path they try to pursue or we try to pursue, that should not compromise the ability of their the ecological and sociological systems they have, psychological even, to be able to regenerate itself. Of course, corruptions, wars, crimes, they are all compromise those prerequisite qualities. So a society that lacks, agency, a society that you can live in a society that, as you said, doesn't have much of a corruption, but it's the prosperity and lack of corruption and safety and security is built upon colonial relationships with other societies over centuries, and that gives them a sense of a misunderstanding that what we are benefiting from was mostly or merely the product of our hard work, which is partly true, but also you need to also look at the historical or you could be a settler colonialist society like the kibbutzes, for instance, very interesting ideas, sharing resources, horizontal government on someone else's land. So, occupation. So, this is very multidimensional. And then you could be also a society that is under bombs, and then your people still go on fasting with demolished or empty fridges, and they come together to pray together and show great solidarity with each other while our houses are demolished, hundreds of thousands injured, tens of thousands killed, every house, every household. And then you got a society when COVID happens, and I witnessed that people go aggressive and show violence over toilet papers. So this is as you said, I agree with you, the context, and you say where this prosperity and lack of crime, or maybe low levels of crime and violence and corruption come from, is that as the result of exporting that to other societies. How much really are we complicit to what's going on in the other parts of the society? Are we only worried about the ecological health and sociological health of our own nation? Is that not related to other nations, other societies, other communities, other ecologies in other parts of the world, when we are extracting massive amounts of the so-called rare earth things in order to have the privilege of driving electric vehicles, and taking pride that we are dealing with the sustainability, and we're saving the planet, while we're turning a blind eye to what's going on in societies where we are actually putting them into very dirty, difficult situations in order to extract their resources. So the green capitalism 101. I don't know if I could understand, but that's my best. That's my best shot. Forgive me if it was not the best. It was not what you were expecting. So Tia's question, life as commons. That's something I think I acknowledge that there could be a little bit problematic in this paper, and maybe in other ones. I haven't really been deeply engaged with theories of commons. I've been mostly, I acknowledge that I've been mostly surveying them, but I realized that, the concept of commons have become very much more widely reinterpreted and used. And when we talk about life as commons, of course, organized life or planetary life, either local or global, doesn't matter. We see that, as I said before, if you look at the commons, we know the original concept of commons from this, shared lands, that in the earlier stages of capitalism became the subject of enclosures and primitive accumulations, and capitalism moved many people away from their lands that were collectively shared or collectively owned, and they turned them into wage laborers the laborers disconnected and distant and estranged from their habitats, from their nature, from their environment, from their land, made them completely dependent on wage, and then subjected themselves to the capitalist relations. But that's a historical account of that normally comes from Europe. But also, for instance, I come from Islamic background, and the concept of commons is we have got something equivalent to the commons, but a little bit more broader, which again means that refers to resources or places or spaces that are commonly shared, and they have their own ways of Islamic ethical or moral codes of organizing and governing those places. So these are not really the idea of commons is not really alien to many cultures, especially the more indigenous your culture is, the more closely corresponds to the way that you have defined your relationship, or you define your relationship with your resources, with land. It could be resources, could be also immaterial in the modern time, for instance, the digital commons and knowledge commons. In fact, this well-living paradigm is meant to be a knowledge common, drawing, as I said before, drawing from a lot of interesting ideas and movements, and co-developing and co-working with them in order to develop a platform. So they would not see this paradigm as too alien to them. They would see some elements of their own efforts and agendas in the paradigm, and they would relate themselves to the paradigm. So this paradigm is a platform, or I would even say it's a knowledge commons. And commons is something, as I said before, an entity. The boundaries are not very rigid. I mean, I'm not saying that they are very rigid. They're commons within commons, and there are so many commons overlapping each other in reality. But these are the places that everybody contributes to that, to the health of it, to the overall health of that entity, and at the same time benefit from that to the extent that those extractions of value out of that common would not compromise the ability of the common to fail to regenerate itself. And if you look at, I don't know, from evolutionary perspective, you look at the way life has overcome entropy, you see that it's as the result of, most of the time, as a result of this mutual collaborations, more mutual cooperations and interrelations and interdependence than competitions, etc., etc. Again, I hope that I have answered Tia's questions to my best, but I would invite you to read the papers and also the book, Capital Redefined, that you may find a little bit more in there. But I understand that this is one of the areas that I need to really explore further and deeper. Maybe I'm mistaken about a number of things. But Bones' question, sorry, maybe I would just skip to Emma's question. Okay, the dangers of normative vision in a time where we are suffering from a lot of crisis. I think, yeah, I mean, in social sciences, interestingly, we haven't been, especially those of us have been very much affected and influenced by positivism and the possibility of having value-free theory and etc., etc. We haven't been really comfortable with the idea of utopia, but practically most of us, if not all of us, are involved in some kind of utopian thinking. You know, the reason that you're here to pursue a degree is that because you have an image of yourself after graduation, where your degree actually brings you a better job opportunity, for instance, or a better way of thinking about reality or life. So that image, that utopian image, is not yet there. It's not a reality yet, but it is a kind of a utopia day to day being experienced. And many theories, even the most conservative, think of Durkheim, right? Durkheim talks about abnormalities and talks about solidarity and values solidarity and integration, social integration. Even it's one of the most conservative sociological theories. In fact, the silence, if you're silent about something, that is about endorsing the status quo as your utopia. So there is no way that we can actually avoid utopia. The solution is just to give it more presence and visibility, so it becomes the subject of critical conversation. So my utopia is this, what do you think? And your utopia is this, and I think it's good in this way and not really good in that way. So you see that utopian thinking is not something, and utopian thinking is not the things that haven't happened. That doesn't mean they would never happen. Many elements of what we think utopia or imaginary or imaginations, many elements of that already exist, as I said, in many of those progressive movements that they pursue such ideals, and some of them are put to practice, and some of them are being experienced. Some of them go wrong, like what happened in the Soviet Union, and some of them may not go wrong that much. So we all humans have been dreaming of flying. Who could believe that we will be able to fly? Not only ourselves, but tons upon tons of materials put it into an aeroplane and fly. So there is no, I think we shouldn't be shy, and in fact, if you go through a severe crisis, it's the time for utopian thinking. And this is always ring in my ears, that is attributed to Che Guevara. Be realistic, demand the impossible. Because the possible sucks. Possible is not really working or functioning. Sorry, Bon, I would just skip you. But you can sacrifice it. Yeah. Okay, thank you so much for being patient, and apologies for taking too much of time, and in case if some aspects of my speech are not that satisfactory, but this is a work in progress, like every other work. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much, Hamed. But it is also an indication that you're working on a very important and also engaging topic in discussion. It's the same thing that happened to us in Helsinki. We also went over time because of the engaging discussions that we had. So thank you to everyone. And as a staff in the Development Studies program here at the University of Jyväskylä, I also would like to thank the School of Resource Wisdom for co-organizing this event, and also colleagues in the Finnish Society for Development Research. I think we can continue discussing with Hamed. Those who are here, we can go for lunch. I think that was part of the idea of scheduling it around lunchtime. And for those online, please also follow the websites of Hamed and also his work. So thank you very much, and have a nice summer ahead to everyone.